Good evening, everybody. It is cold, it is wet, it is miserable, and it is definitely November out there. But don't worry, I have got a cracking episode of The Action Effect for you today. So last week I got to sit down with the lovely Paddy Moogan. Now, if you work in digital and you don't know who Paddy Moogan is, then where the heck have you been? Paddy was one of the original co-founders of one of the most prolific agencies in the UK, which still is today known as Aira. Paddy came up with the concept of Aira alongside his business partner Matt at the time after a few too many cocktails at a Vegas casino. And for the next 10 years they went on to partner on one of the best, most culturally brilliant agencies of our time. However, fast forward to February 2024, and unfortunately for Paddy, he found himself navigating an extreme mental health breakdown, a situation that is only too familiar for far too many of us in digital. Now, in this podcast, we cover everything from point of agency founder, creating an incredible culture within your agency, and also navigating a mental health crisis. Now, if any of that sounds familiar to you, sit back, relax, and enjoy this brilliant episode of The Action Effect with the one and only Paddy Moogan. Good afternoon, Paddy. Lovely to have you on at The Action Effect. Thank you very much for joining.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. And thank you again, because I've been desperate to talk to you on the pod for a while now after our first catch up. Because that first chat that we had was supposed to be 30 minutes or so. And I think we went on for over an hour with a lot of very common ground.
We could have carried on, yeah.
Definitely. And I think after having stalked you for several years without you probably realising on LinkedIn, it was a real fangirl moment to actually chat to you and get to hear about more of your story. So yeah, The Action Effect, as we've chatted about, it's designed to talk to people who've taken action on stuff, hard stuff, and achieved really great things. And obviously you very much fall into that category. So I'm really keen to hear about your journey with Aira, especially in the early days, and how you even came to be Aira, because within our world, Aira are infamous for all of the right reasons. And then head on to your story around your mental health and the progression of yourself post Aira and what that looked like, because I think it's safe to say it was a difficult time, and I'm really keen to hear about your journey as an agency owner, and to help with any practical tips and things like that for people who are finding themselves in similar situations. So I think let's just get into it, if that's all right.
Yep, sounds good. I can go right back to the start to begin with, and give kind of the potted history of what happened with Aira. So I was working at an agency called Distilled back in the day. I was there for about 5 years and started as a consultant in SEO and ended up running their London office. And I'd always had this kind of little niggle to work for myself and probably start an agency or consultancy, something along those lines. I never really knew what it was. I just knew that one day I wanted to work for myself. But I was also very, very happy at Distilled. It was a great place to work. I enjoyed my colleagues I worked with. I had a great boss, really good, challenging work. So had a few opportunities to kind of leave and do something along the way, but never really felt like quite the right opportunity. And because I was really happy, I was like, well, there's no rush to do it. So I kind of put it off for quite a long time, but I knew it was probably going to happen at some point. And I eventually got the chance to join up with my co-founder at the time, a guy called Matt Beswick, who we kind of knew each other through the industry. Like lots of us, particularly at that point in time, we kind of been to the same conferences, the same networking events, and kind of knew of each other. And coincidentally, my wife was working for him, or used to work for him at his old agency. So she always claims credit for the two of us joining together. She said it was because of her, essentially. So we kind of started chatting even more because of that. And eventually it was a random conversation when we were both in Seattle, of all places, and I was speaking at MozCon as part of Distilled, and he was running his own small agency called Hidden Pixel. And I remember it so well. We was in a bar, and I kind of really offhand comment said, oh, we should do something together at some point. And that was it. It kind of stopped there. And then I think it was the following day, we kind of said, yeah, we should probably talk about that even more. and randomly ended up going to Vegas after Seattle. I was due to go anyway with my wife to kind of decompress after the conference. Matt and his wife joined us as well. And then we went for a quick drink in the Aria casino, and after about half an hour or so had agreed on all of the terms, I guess, if that's what you want to call them, and the agreement
Yeah.
and what we wanted to do and why and stuff like that. I then flew home and handed in my notice at Distilled and worked to the end of that year. So about 5 months or so I carried on for. And then January 2015 started Aira with Matt. And I was running for about 10 years or so. But yeah, it started in a casino. So not many agencies can say that. But that's also where the name came from, because it's Aria backwards. And again, my wife claims credit for that.
Brilliant.
Because we was at the pub drunk whilst brainstorming, and she thinks it's I've still got the napkin where we wrote down all of these terrible names, and Aria was one of them, and then we reversed it. And so, yeah, that's where we came from.
Amazing. So a gamble, but not at a table in a casino, that definitely paid off.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely one of the safer gambles that was being taken in the casino that day.
Yeah, I bet. No, that's great. I love that. And I think, there's a lot of chat around luck in personal development, business development, etc. But the luck is one thing, the people you bump into and meet, like you did with your partner with Aira. But at the same time, it's making the opportunity of making the most of the luck or of that opportunity, isn't it? And it sounds like the progression and the development and even the kickoff of Aira was exactly that. It was like, well, it's quite lucky that we've met, but actually the action required to make something of the luck of meeting, it takes a heck of a lot of gumption, and to just go, do you know what, let's call it after a casino and let's crack on.
Yeah, and I think there's, whether people like to call it luck or not, I'm actually I hate the idea of luck, because I like the idea of being in control of different things, and I'm not a big believer in fate. I believe that we often put ourselves in situations or not, but there is an element of right place, right time, I think, and taking action off the back of that. And I think for me, as I kind of alluded to, it was the right time. It felt like the right person, and speaking very openly, one of the reasons that I took action at that point and tried to actually leave and start an agency is because Matt had an existing very small agency there was 3 of them in total, so Matt and 2 other people. So it felt like I was stepping into something that was already a little bit built. It wasn't big, but it was. It felt better to me than going off and starting completely on my own and being a freelancer for a while or a contractor, because I loved where I worked so much. I hated the idea of going from that big team, big culture, to just being on my own. I know I didn't want to do that. So there's definitely an element of Matt coming along at the right time for me, having the setup that felt very attractive to me. Frankly, also made it less risky for me as well to step out of it, step out of Distilled and into Aira. But yeah, it made that, I guess, decision a lot easier to take. And I think I've spoken to a lot of people since then who have been thinking about starting their own companies or leaving their agency to start their own. And I've always said, like, if you're okay with stepping out and working on your own for a while, go for it. But you have to try and decide if that's right for you. Because for some people like me, it wasn't. So in that case, maybe you're better off joining an early stage agency or joining as a collective of 3 or 4 people, that kind of thing. So making that kind of decision, has to be surrounded with the right context. And yeah, it could be luck, it could be right place, right time. But I think knowing what you really want is really important when you're making that decision and taking that kind of action on leaving a job and starting a new one.
That's really interesting, actually, isn't it? Because that element of right place, right time, but being dependent on what you have as a vision is right for you for that initial step. Because I bet there's a fine line between it being the right time to make that jump, but being, some people I feel maybe get paralyzed by making sure that everything is right time, right this, right that, and all of, every single duck must be in a row before you make that leap. So what clicked for you to make you realize that, yes, there's always going to be an element of risk when you go and set up your own thing, but enough of the pieces of the puzzle had clicked for you to go, I'm willing to take that risk because these have clicked?
Yeah, I think that the big thing for me was just minimizing that risk as much as possible, and trying to make sure that okay, if I'm going to do this, what's the downside? What's the worst case scenario? And to me, the worst case scenario felt like, well, it could go wrong and I could end up jobless. And I was like, well, I'll just go and get another job. Thankfully, I work in an industry that was very buoyant and very kind of good in terms of getting jobs. So I felt, well, if it goes wrong, I'll just go and get a job. And even if I don't love the job, I can earn money, I can pay the bills. It's not that hard to go and get another job with my level of experience at the time, because I think I'll be doing SEO for maybe 10 years at that point. So I felt that having distilled on my CV, having that experience, worst case scenario, yep, go and get a job again. Again, my ego would take a bit of a bruising perhaps, but that's fine. You can get over that quite quickly. But yeah, I think it was calculating that risk and thinking, what's the worst case scenario here and how would I deal with that worst case scenario? So also I didn't have loads of savings behind me, but I had enough for a few months worth of costs and rent and making sure we weren't going to lose that flat, that kind of stuff at the time.
Yeah.
My wife had a secure job at the time as well. So that all added up to make that risk and the worst case scenario, okay, it's not great, but it's manageable if that worst case scenario comes true. So I think it's about calculating that for you really in trying to decide, is it the right time, is it the right person, the right opportunity, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just weighing up those balances and working out what's worth the risk. And it's not necessarily like there's a physical click, but I've talked to a lot of freelancers and myself as well, and it sounds like for you too that it's almost like a mental click where it just seems like that is the right time. So you can discuss it, chat yourself through it so much, but then suddenly something happens and just that click happens and you think, right, now is the right time.
Yeah, and I think because it's a mental thing as well, that really does hold us back, because all of us often get imposter syndrome. A lot of us kind of get nervous about making big decisions that could be very risky. And some people are more kind of likely to take those risks than others. I've never been a huge risk taker necessarily, but it felt right. It felt like the right time. Like I said, that gut feeling, and mentally I was in the right place. And that's quite hard to make kind of actionable for other people, because it is a gut instinct. It is mentally thinking, yes, I can do this. But I think all you can do is accept the fact that it is a decision that is never going to be completely risk-free, and having that confidence in yourself to think, well, yes, I'm going to, no matter what, I'm going to give it my best shot. Here's how I'm going to approach it. If it goes wrong, here's how I'm going to handle it. It doesn't remove that risk or remove the need for you to think mentally, I can do this. I've got the skills and knowledge to do this. But it minimises those kind of imposter syndrome thoughts coming into your head and trying to make it a bit easier.
Yeah, exactly. Because at the end of the day, no one can erase the 10 years worth of, SEO know-how that you've built up. That's going to be there with you forever as your craft before you took Steed on Aira. But it's a big shift to go from an SEO guru to a business leader, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely different for myself as a guru either, so that probably didn't help. I did actually underestimate that bit, to be completely honest. And I remember really well my old boss at the time, who I'm still in touch with now, quite good, Will Critchlow, who founded Distilled. We went for breakfast the week before I left, and he actually said to me almost what you just described, that making that change from an SEO consultant, an employee, kind of managing an office, to this being your own business is a very big one. Now, I was kind of like, well, yeah, I know that. But he kind of said and warned me in some ways that be prepared for the bits that you don't expect. Like, it will change. It will feel very different. You can be fantastic at what you're doing right now, but when it's your own, it hits you on a completely different level. And I was kind of like, yeah, I get it. And I remember texting him probably a couple of years later, to be fair. I was like, yeah, I really get it now. Like, he was right.
Yeah.
One of the things that he also said to me that has always stuck with me, which turned out to be very true, is when you're working for someone else and you're a manager, you have a degree of protection because it's not your company. You've still got bosses above you. You've got a CEO or founders above you. Yeah, when it's your own company, the book stops with you. So as a manager, when you're running a company, it's your company, it feels very different to the people who are working for you, because you're the boss, you're the literal boss of the company. And people struggle with that sometimes. And the attitude towards me as the owner of the company versus the attitude towards me of Paddy, who's worked his way up from the bottom and is now a manager of a team at someone else's company, they're very different things. And he warned me about that and didn't necessarily tell me how to get around it, because there's not really a way around it, but it's something to be prepared for when you do make that shift from part of a team, part of a company, a very senior manager perhaps, to your own thing. It's a weird feeling, and I still don't quite know if I ever got used to it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a classic case of you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
You literally cannot estimate how tricky that switch is until you go and do it and take action on it. So, from a founder's perspective, then, what made the click with Matt the one for Aira?
I think it definitely helped.
And you and Aira, obviously.
Yeah, it's so one of the things that we spoke about back in the casino that day was that his background at the time was running a very small agency and working mostly with small and local businesses around the area that he was in, and charging hundreds of pounds, maybe 1,000 or two per month for SEO and PPC, that kind of stuff. So relatively small retainers. I was at the exact other end of the scale, working at Distilled, working with internationals, multinationals on 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand a month retainers. And we kind of felt there was a place in the middle of those areas, and the way you work and the way you service different kinds of companies at those different sizes, we felt we could build something that was somewhere in the middle, that was still a very, very good service and very, very good way of working with a client, but not charging 10, 15, 20 grand a month and charging, say 5, 6, 7. We felt there was a big area there we could do a very, very good job at. But also alongside that, at the time he was based just outside Milton Keynes. I was in London, and I'd seen the London agency culture develop, where they try and make it a great place to work. They have nice shiny offices, all these nice perks, all that kind of stuff. That didn't really exist in and around Milton Keynes in the agency world, and he'd worked as a consultant to a lot of them. And so he wanted us to try and create that London agency feel where you could have a great career, get paid well, get the perks and benefits, but not have to be in London. And for Milton Keynes at the time, if you were in Milton Keynes, you had to travel to London to get that kind of experience working for someone. And he wanted to create that in and around Milton Keynes. And I felt like I could help him do that because I've worked at a great agency. I could bring a lot of that experience with me. So that was the other side of it as well. It made it feel like a good match, because that's what he saw an opportunity for. And I'd been there and done it, so I could bring that experience. And I think he pretty much said to me, can you just steal the best bits of the Distilled culture and bring them with you, and the ways of working and the policies and the perks and the culture? Can you kind of extract all of that and bring it with you? And I think I did okay at that, to be honest. And that was a big thing where we could join together and do a good job.
Yeah, and team and culture as a whole I know runs really deep for you, because it's something that we've talked about a couple of times on our catch up. So, and it's really interesting to hear that you're one of the clicking moments for you of knowing to go. The time was right. Was that Matt was bringing an element of team? So I don't know. I've not heard of, with people I've spoken to before, having that as kind of like a clickable thing, if you know what I mean, like a jigsaw piece they're looking for as going out as a founder. So it's really interesting to hear that element of team runs so strong for you. So tell me a bit more about that and why that's so important, why you feel that is such a strong kind of mantra for you, because it's something that coexisted in Aira throughout the entire time you were there. Everyone that I've spoken to who has been, an Aira team member literally sings praises of culture, lovely place to work. We've got a few ex-Aira bods in the interim community as well who sing praises. So tell me about that. How why is it so important? How is it part of your DNA?
I think it's probably a couple of things, but one of them is definitely, I was working in a very good culture previously at Distilled, where they put a lot of effort into the team and our development, and that became to got to such a point where it felt like, well, that's just how it should be, and this is how a company should be run. We weren't perfect by any means. Speak to anyone who worked there. We all had our grumbles and our issues, but we all agreed that, generally speaking, it was a good place to work, particularly for developing people and developing their careers and kind of giving them a platform to build upon for whatever the next step may be. And I kind of didn't want anything but that. And I've kind of got this thing's very personal to me, which is around enjoying your jobs. And the way I look at it, a very simplified manner, is like we work, give or take, 5 days out of 7. If you don't enjoy your job, it's a pretty miserable existence that you've got. And that I just find that sad. And I find that, well, try and change it, try and do something else. And I always get triggered by just my friends from school and back home, which is like, if they moan about their job, I'm like, right, how do we fix it? How do we change it? They might not want me to, they're just moaning, but I get triggered quite quickly by someone saying they don't enjoy their job because I want to help fix it. So I think deep down it goes back to that, and this idea that I've always been very fortunate. I've only had probably 3 or 4 jobs, and I've enjoyed all of them. I've never worked at a bad place, to be honest, which means I'm a bit biased and probably got very rose-tinted views as well. But, to me, it was, well, yeah, of course, that's normal. That's how it should be. And I wanted to carry that through to somewhere where, well, it's my company. It's somewhere that I've got control over this stuff now. Of course, I'm going to try and make it as good as possible. And of course, I'm going to try and make it what I've experienced in a positive way and try and bring those elements through. So it kind of felt like common sense to me. And I know it's not. I know that's quite potentially a privileged position to be from, where it's like, well, yeah, of course, that's how it should be. But I think it comes from there, really, and that kind of brief from Matt in many ways, which was, can you bring the best bits of what you've got now to what we're building? And I wanted to deliver on that. And I think for the most part, I did. There's definitely some mistakes I made along the way, which I'm sure we can come to shortly. But I think on the whole, I think I did a reasonably good job on that.
Yeah, I think, and as someone who's worked in an agency where culture has come first and enjoyment, and it's come from the top down, I can tell you now as an employee, it makes such the world of difference. If that's embedded from CEO level and dispersed via osmosis down to employee level, the feeling within those agencies is so much better. I've worked both sides. I want jobs in general where the culture hasn't been, it's been very kind of salesy, or, not a lot of focus on this. I say softer, but I think soft is a derogatory word when it comes to people stuff, because it's so important. But do you know what I mean? It's not kind of stuff you can write down in a handbook. It's how does it feel to come into the office? What is the vibe? What are people like? What's the CEO like when he's in and amongst or he or she is in amongst the team? What's that feeling that's created? So to have that level of importance on that side of the agency is massive, because I don't think it's valued as much, because it's so easy to get caught up in the revenue element and the sales revenue and the figures and the everyday numbers part, as opposed to actually how is everybody doing and feeling, and what's the general vibe in the agency.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think obviously you've had that experience, and I've had it as well, working somewhere where it is good and you feel it from the top down. And like you said, maybe, soft isn't quite the right word for it, but definitely it's intangible, right? It's something that's very hard to quantify, write down, set a target against. And that means that a lot of CEOs who don't naturally lean this way, they don't really think about it, because you can't measure it very easily. But I think when you're working at any kind of a business that is essentially, it sounds terrible, but I've never been able to word it any other way, but in an agency, people are the product, right? That's what you're selling, people's time. And 100%. When that is your product, not a piece of software or not furniture or whatever, if those people hate their jobs, it's going to carry through to your clients. And again, to me, that's common sense. So, people are going to have bad days and not be happy 100% of the time. But generally speaking, if those people are engaged, if they're motivated, they're generally quite happy in their jobs, that carries through to the other people they work with. And that's good for the company, because then your clients are happy, and if your clients are happy, they'll keep paying you and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, there's performance to it as well. But fundamentally, if I'm a client working with a point of contact in an agency, and I can just tell that I don't really care about the job or me or what they're doing, I'm not going to like that, and I'm not going to want to stay working with that person or that agency. So I think in this kind of world where it's people working with people, the happiness and engagement and job satisfaction of those people is really paramount to the success of that company.
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And even though that bit is tricky to put numerical value on kind of specifically, it can almost be tracked because the revenue will dictate how happy the team's happiness almost dictates the revenue, dictates the new sales that are coming in, it dictates client retention, people retention, everything else that's associated with the service that we work in, because we're service level industry, as you said. It will speak for itself, even though you can't directly measure happiness, or some people, I think some agencies do, they have things like the happiness index, and I'm sure your friend, have you? And so tell me about that. What were kind of the practical steps or actions you actually took to measure happiness?
Yeah, I think it was around maybe 2017, 2018, so 2 to 3 years into Aira's journey, and we were probably 30 to 40 people in size at that point, and so the culture started to grow, and it was now not me managing everyone, it was like me managing managers and managing the rest of the team. And I started to see a need to try and quantify happiness at scale, or quantify job satisfaction at scale. So we started off just using some software. It was called WorkBuzz. There's a software company that still exists, who do, I think it was weekly surveys where you get asked a bunch of questions, pretty standard stuff, and some of those questions change on a weekly basis. Some of them are consistent. One of the consistent ones we asked every single week was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you at work this week, or how are you feeling at the moment? And we use those scores to try and get a bit of an idea of how people were feeling. And then other questions were about specifics that we kind of went through every so often. On reflection, it helped, but it's still, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. You have to take it and zoom out and look at the trends, really, because again, everyone has a bad week. If that survey lands in their inbox right after they've got off a bad client call, they're not going to feel very happy, or not going to feel they're most engaged. Also, I'm having a great debate with one of our team once, who said that it wasn't about happiness at work. So why are you asking people if they're happy or not? I think he wanted us to measure job satisfaction instead, and they're subtly different, and I didn't change it in the end. He may have been right, I don't know, but it's a hard thing to quantify. But I think you can quantify it to some extent, as long as you don't then take it in that way, as long as you don't take it as black and white and say, well, great, these scores are up, we're fine. You still have to look beyond it and think, well, what's actually going on here, and still speak to people. Don't take that element out of it. Still speak to your managers and get their view on it as well. But so I think quantifying it is definitely possible, but you can't take away the qualitative side of it as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's it is tricky, because I've been in those situations where we've done surveys, and lots of agencies owners do those as well, and I think there's probably the results probably a lot dependent on how enthusiastic the management are about putting those schemes in place as well. Because I've been in those as an employee in these situations where they've opened with, oh, if you could just do this, it'd be really handy. We're kind of just trying to get an idea of, as opposed to positioning it as, we really are invested in your happiness. So if you can be genuine in these responses, we really want to know how you are. Yeah. It frames the exact same thing in two very different lights, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And leading on from that as well, you have to show that you're making change off the back of that, what you're saying as well. And I think if people are doing what you've asked of them and contributing, giving feedback, scoring you, that kind of stuff, but then nothing happens in return, or they just don't hear anything, they start to wonder, well, why am I giving this feedback? And I think something that we used to say quite a lot, and I think it resonated, my team would now tell me, is we can't, when it came to the surveys and what people told us, we always said that we can't promise to action everything. We can't promise to change everything that you ask for, but we do promise to listen. And that's all we could really do. So every piece of feedback, we'd always listen, we'd always read it. sometimes I'd read it and smack my head on the table and think, what am I doing here? Like, I don't get this. I don't why aren't you happy all the time? Like that. But it's kind of like we used to take all of it. Some of it we could action very easily. Some of it we couldn't. Some of it we needed more information to action it. But we was always very open about the fact we're not going to change everything you say to us, but we will always read it. We always listen, or we will always have a conversation about it. So I think, and then what the bits that you do actually action and change, you sometimes then have to make it obvious that you're doing those things as well, and making it obvious that yes, we heard you. This is what you've told us. Here's what we've done as a result. You have to. You don't want to kind of patronise people, but you have to show that connection. Show where you said this, we did this. Here's the result. You can't just make the change and assume people are going to see it or people are going to notice it. So I think making it really obvious is also really important when you are listening and you are taking action, and then people realise, oh, what I'm saying is being looked at and it's also being actioned where appropriate.
Yeah, and communicating when it's not and why it's not as well.
Yeah, I was actually literally trying to think of an example where we said no to something, but I can't think of one. And there's always a bit of a running joke that Matt and I, it was a running joke, but I think it's true most of the time, that we rarely say no to stuff. Like, if it's reasonable and it's fair, we're probably going to consider it and probably at least try it. Because we use that as a way to try and encourage people to put forward ideas, because it's quite rare we'd flat out say no to something. But sometimes you do. Sometimes people come up with an idea and you're like, absolutely not, we cannot do that. But that's quite rare, to be honest.
Yeah, it goes from anything from can we have a 4-day week through to please can we have more flavours of protein shake in the staff kitchen, which is a genuine one from an agency owner that I chatted to a few weeks ago.
Actually, we did say no to the 4-day week as well, so that was actually a good example. We asked for that a lot and we said no to. I still think that's the right call to say no to it at the time. But that's a great example of where we said no.
Yeah. No, I think that those feedback sessions are, it's funny how positioning is so important with that kind of thing from senior management, and how seriously those things are taken, because I've seen it in environments where the suggestions or the feedback boxes or whatever they are, the questionnaires, have been literally read out at staff meetings and suggestions called out and laughed at in front of the team when they're supposed to be anonymous kind of environments, and taken seriously, and someone's actually taken time out of their day to put that suggestion in there, and the senior management team have read it out and laughed at it in front of everybody, versus an agency where they've done exactly what you're saying, taken it on board and either said yes or no, but with reasoning either way.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just devastating when you hear it's not taken kind of.
Yeah, exactly. It's a surefire way of stopping people from ever suggesting anything ever again, right?
Exactly.
So how you treat that feedback. And I was actually just thinking as you were talking there, I think the closest we did have that kind of opportunity to give feedback anonymously and make suggestions and that kind of thing. But we also had towards the end of my time at Aira, like a monthly presentation from me on a bunch of different things. Part of that was also you can ask me anything and I would read it out as is and just answer it in real time in the presentation that I was doing with everyone. And there was definitely some of those that I probably did laugh at with the team, but they were kind of like the kind of things where people were almost trolling me in the end and asking me silly things. So there's things that are very, very obviously, okay, we don't really mean this, but you have to try and tell the difference. And I think I got it right most of the time, but maybe sometimes I didn't. But there's definitely things where you have to realise, no, this person's being serious. Maybe they are a junior who's never thought of this before, or just don't really know what they're asking, or can't word it correctly. Yeah. But how you respond to those as a leader dictates what you're going to get in the future as well. So you do have to try and tell the difference where, you can laugh at this and it's okay, you can make a joke about it, versus when someone is actually making a real serious suggestion, or in their mind a serious suggestion.
Yeah, I completely agree. That it's exactly that. And putting the fear of God in people of not suggesting things because they've been laughed at or whatever is just it creates such an awful culture. And I guess before we move, because I'm really keen to progress into you specifically in your kind of journey within Aira itself. But just before we do that, quite a few of the people that we're kind of reaching out to with the Action Effect is agency owners. So within agency, better than most people, profit, 2 big P's are the things that focus on. You're obviously incredibly intertwined with the people element. From an actionable perspective, do you think the steps or the hierarchy or the structure or whatever it might be that you had at Aira was right for you, or what practical tips could you recommend, or what actions did you find helped specifically with this people element with an agency, because it's such a contentious and tricky thing to get right.
Yeah, I think that one of the most actionable things that I think we worked on and did around culture, even though it is kind of intangible, is really trying to give clear career progression to people.
Okay.
Because ultimately, if we think about one of my favourite definitions of culture is the way that we do things around here. That's it. And when you think about it in those terms, it's the way you hire people, the way you fire people, the way you give people pay rises, promotions, that kind of stuff. Everything you do, the way in which you do those things is your culture. So one of the most actionable things that we did, I think actually worked really well for a long time, was putting a lot of effort into showing people what their career progression could be at Aira. So, for example, we had paths mapped out of, okay, if you're currently a content strategist, here's the next step up for you, here's the one after that, here's what happens if you go sideways into, say, digital PR, which we spent a hell of a lot of time mapping those out for every single role and making sure that each role had a description attached to it, responsibilities, what you'd be held accountable for. We put so much effort into that. And I think that really helped because it showed that we really did care about people's careers. And the way I looked at it was, if I can help someone develop in their career and learn and develop, that's going to be good for our clients. And it's good for our clients, it's good for the people. And so it kind of works both ways. So I think that's one actual thing I'd say, that if you're an agency owner, you really have to look at your team and think about, well, why are they turning up every day? Why are they getting out of bed for me? Like, what is it that I'm doing? Because it is you. Like, I know the company and the agency can be a bit abstract, but it's you. It's you as a person that they're coming into work for. Why are they doing it? And ultimately, I think I brought it right down to the fact that everyone needs a next step in their career and everyone needs to know what they're working towards. So it could be a promotion, it could be a pay rise, and then in between those things, it could be they want to work on a really interesting project, they want to work on a big brand, they want to work on Amazon, whoever it may be. Like, they want these things in their career. You need to understand what those things are that matter to them and then try and give them as much of that as possible. You can't do all of it, you can't do this for everyone, but you need to understand what people's next steps always are, and they need to see that as well. And I think that really drives the culture, because if you've got everyone thinking in that way and trying to progress and being ambitious and wanting to move up through the ranks and get promoted and do more cool work, that drives the culture massively, I think. And that's one of the most actionable ways you can actually go about doing that.
Nice, I like that. I think that we got taught something on kind of the I can't remember what training it was in, some form of agency training about valuing the things that matter to other people. A manager who just skips someone's one-to-one because they're too busy, in the manager's mind, is huge. For that employee, their one-to-one was probably something they've been prepping for a week or a month or whatever, and it's big in their calendar, and it's aligning your mind to what matters to them, as opposed to just flitting stuff away like that.
Yeah, that that's a really good point. That's huge. One of the things that I always train my managers on is don't cancel one-to-ones. Like, you need to rearrange them. Stuff happens, life happens. If you need to rearrange it, fine. Rearrange it for later that day, the following day, that kind of stuff. But don't cancel it and forget about it. Because, like I said, people, it means more to them than to you, almost certainly.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse than feeling like your manager doesn't care about your own development. So yeah, that's a huge problem that a lot of managers have, and they don't realise it's a problem.
And yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess a question for you would be then, because you've grown, you've been through that transition of small agency through to big with Aira. So how do you implement or make clear paths of progression obvious when you're in those smaller stages to employees?
Yeah, so actually, I think when you're a bit smaller, I'd probably argue there's some more opportunities. So you may not have a structure
Okay.
yet. So if you're, I don't know, 5 people or even up to 10 people, you probably don't have multiple teams at that point, multiple team leaders and that kind of stuff. But to me, that's a chance to say to your team, you've got the opportunity to kind of define where we go next. Like if there's no structure at the moment or no formalized lines of communication or teams or anything like that, the team who you've got have the opportunity to kind of put the hand up and say, well, actually, I think I want to do this. I'd love to step up and own this bit of what we do. I'd love to be able to specialize in this. If there's no one in those seats at the moment because there's no structure, to me, it's like, well, put your hand up and try and do it. And I'd be encouraging my team to try and do that. If I'm a small agency, so again, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, those people have the opportunity to say, well, here's what I want to do. And because it doesn't exist yet, it doesn't mean you're going to say yes to it, but you've probably got more chance of saying yes to it than if you're a 40-person agency that's already got an SEO team with head of and a PPC team with a director, that kind of stuff. If you're smaller, I think there's more opportunities. And I think one of the lines that an old boss said to me once that kept me from leaving actually was, I don't know what opportunities are going to be for me, but there will be opportunities. And it was up to me to try and also spot them as well, because they were growing quite quickly. And that's something which I think is really important for everyone, but especially if you're a smaller team, there's opportunity for you to say, here's what I want, and I want to do it. I want to own it. Give me the support that I need, and I'll do it for you. Like, for example, if you work in an agency that does lots of different services, and one of them might be, let's say, content marketing, and they don't have anyone leading that function right now, put your hand up and say, look, I want to lead it. I want to make this bit of what we do a whole service. I want to make it its own thing. I want to make it its own team. Again, whether the owner says yes is another matter, but put your hand up and say you want to do it. And I think if I was the owner of an agency at that size again, I'd be encouraging people to do that, because that's what you want, people to stick their hand up and say, yes, I want to do this, I want to own it.
Nice. I really like that. And I've never ever thought of smaller agency land in that kind of viewpoint either, because that's the classic empowering people to help shape the future of the agency. And it's like you speak to so many agencies where director of this, director of that has been there since the embryonic stages of the agency, and most likely because they've been given exactly what you've just described there, the opportunity and the ability to go hand up. And then if you're a founder who is struggling for time or struggles to delegate, having someone come forward and say, I'm really up for taking some of this responsibility. I mean, what a gift.
Yeah, exactly. And we had someone in the early days of Aira who started as a digital marketer and then lent very heavily into account management and client services, because firstly she was very good at it, but also it didn't really exist at that point. Like we didn't have account managers, which was a very deliberate decision. But she started to build out that function because she was good at it and wanted to do it and wanted to grab it. And she did a very good job of that for many years after that point as well. But if she hadn't put her hand up, we might not have even done it, or we might have brought someone else in eventually. She kind of carved her own path at that point.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that it's such a refreshing and practical way, again, actionable way for smaller agency owners who have big ambitions to look at how to create that career progression without having those natural paths of hierarchy in place already. Love it. So it's tailoring to our agency owners again, and founders and anyone who's looking at that kind of leadership journey. It's a tough one, really, really hard. And I think you have been through that in a considerable way, as lots of other agency owners have, but you're super open about that. And it was something that I really, really enjoyed about our first chat, because we had a lot in common. So it's not to put any form of dampener on it at all, because I think it's really important that we talk about just how difficult it is. Can you tell us a bit about how your journey as a founder, co-founder, resulted in trickier times from a mental health perspective, where you're at now, and why you're keen to chat about it and put it into a book moving forward?
Yeah. So for context, so again, I was at Aira for about 10 years or so. The first 5 years until the pandemic, I don't want to say were easy, but they were relatively straightforward. I think we had the same issues, challenges as everyone else, but it was relatively simple to. I think we punched doubled year on year for the first 5 years, and so we had challenges, and it was difficult and hard, but it was all kind of expected. And then obviously the pandemic was very unexpected and kind of killed half the business overnight pretty much, and kind of reset things. And I think if I'm being truthful with myself and anyone else, I've felt like we'd been on the back foot since 2020. And even though there were some points in 2021, 2022 where things definitely stepped up and got better, it was still, it felt like things changed massively around that point and never really got back to how they were. And part of that is actually the culture. I think going hybrid, remote, that kind of stuff definitely damaged my relationship with the agency and what I was trying to build, which didn't help either. But I think it culminated in me speaking very openly, having a mental breakdown earlier this year in kind of February, March 2024. And I think I've reflected a lot on this since that point, and had some therapy for it as well. And I think one of the things that has definitely come out since then that I've realised is the culmination of lots of small things going wrong in day-to-day agency life. The accumulation of all of that on my mental health really did hurt, and I don't think I realised how much lots of small things can build up and actually compound in your mind and end up, in my case, kind of with it all coming crashing down. So, for example, you always lose clients. Your agency, you're going to lose clients, you're going to win clients. It's pretty normal. You're going to hire staff and lose staff. Like, all of those things are pretty normal. But it felt like for a good 2 years or so, maybe 2.5 years, it was just bad stuff. One thing after another. Every week there was something that seemed like it was going wrong. And whilst there were definitely bright spots in the middle, it felt like there was more bad things than good. And I think that wasn't just perception. I think it was a reality of what we was going through. And I definitely underestimated the impact on my mental health that all of these problems week on week were having on me. And I made the mistake of just trying to, as my therapist put it, to-do list my way out of my situation, where I'm like, well, just do stuff, just crack on, just get things done and you'll get through. Because up until before the pandemic, that's what I'd done and it had worked. Like you get a challenge, you figure out how to overcome it and you do it until it doesn't work, and you kind of do it over and over again every single week or every single month. And I think eventually it just got too much for me to keep doing that week in, week out. And I didn't realise that I was in such a bad place until I stopped. And I had a mental breakdown, and I thought I would take a few weeks off and then go back again and crack on. Typical. And then realised during that time off that actually, no, something's wrong here. Something's got to change. And don't know if I've ever said this publicly before, but I'm saying now, like it was... it hit me really hard when my wife and my business partner at the time both asked me separately, am I okay to be on my own? And that's when it was like, shit, okay. So them both saying that to me shows I'm really not okay, and shows that I had to change something in my life. And that's when almost instantly I was like, okay, I need to change my relationship with my job. And in the end, I decided I need to just leave that job, so to speak, like leave my company, because if my mind is in that kind of a point, that's not okay. And I remember talking to my wife about leaving my agency, and she literally said to me, is it going to be any worse than what you've got right now? And the answer was no. Like, it felt terrible to leave this thing I'd built, but given where I was at, it was going to still be a better decision and put me in a better place. So yeah, that's kind of how things ended. It wasn't the ending I ever dreamt of. It wasn't the walking off into the sunset like most agency owners dream of, but it's what I needed at that point in time. Yeah, it was never kind of what I intended, but thankfully I was able to step out. Thankfully my business partner was able to step in and help me through that period as well, and support me how I needed to be supported, and I got through it. I'm still working through a bunch of things, but it's it was a tough time. And one of the positives that's come out of it is I've shared bits and pieces of that story with people over the last 6 months or so. A lot of people go through this, maybe not to the extent that I've just described, but a lot of people go through really difficult times, and don't always talk about it, and it's mostly men, to be honest, who don't talk about it. It's one of our massive issues that we all seem to have. But I've had a lot of people contact me and say that they've gone through similar things, and whether you're a man or a woman, it's hard to run an agency, it's hard to run a business, and I think not enough of us talk about it, to be honest. And that's why I'm trying to talk about it more and talk about it the best I can, really, and share stuff.
No, I think it is very, very relatable to so many people. You know, my brother runs his own business, and he said the same about, you know, men within his world. On, you know, the LinkedIn profile is very different to what's going on behind the scenes, and, you know, raised X amount via investment, and it looks all sunshine and roses, but actually behind the scenes for lots of people, it's a very, very different scenario. And to get to the point that kind of, again, mental click in your mind of, holy crap, I need to do something about this. What were the actual actions that came off the back of that realization that you were in a spot that needed dealing with?
Yeah, the very first thing I did after being asked that question by my wife was I went and found a therapist. I booked in, I think it was literally the following morning, I think I was able to get someone local who I could go and see. So thankfully that was quite quick, and that helped. I've had a couple of sessions with them. They weren't quite the right therapist for me, but just having those couple of sessions initially just to dump everything out there and get it out of my head definitely helped me to start processing things. So that was the immediate action I took. The next action was to speak to my business partner about, okay, what are the options here? Like, I don't think I can come back, or I don't think I can come back in my old form. So what do we do? And had a bunch of conversations about it. So just talking it through really and starting to feel like I was taking time to step forward really did help. And just being really open and honest with him, and also with myself. Like, it sounds weird, kind of like, but I wasn't really doing that. I was kind of thinking I'd just get through it and carry on, but in reality I couldn't. So I think those kind of actions I took really did make a difference then. And I think as well, just switching off from work and allowing myself to switch off the best I could. So that was another big difference maker at that point in time, which took a bit of, I had to do some work to be able to hand stuff over and stuff like that. But once I'd done that, that made a big difference too.
Definitely, I can imagine. And so there's a lot to unpack in terms of the various steps and the actions that you've taken to kind of, first of all, the realization that this wasn't just a bit of exhaustion and, you know, I'm just having a bit of a crap week. It was considerably more than that, to recognizing it, to taking immediate action. And then so something we touched on last time we spoke about is, now that you recognize that bad spot and took the initial action, what kind of actions are you taking to try and navigate something like that in the future? Or prevent it, should I say? Hopefully prevent it.
Yeah, I think that I'd fallen into a trap of, it kind of felt like the business was running me at many points rather than me running the business. And I tried to quantify that and think to myself, what does that actually mean? And to give a really concrete example, there were many times in the last couple of years of running Aira where I wanted things to happen and got told by my management team, no, we can't do that. And sometimes I were right, sometimes I were wrong. But I realised that, okay, I don't want to run a dictatorship here, but it's not right that I can't influence change in my own company because of the way we'd set things up. And it was kind of my own fault in many ways, because I lean very, very, very heavily towards giving people trust and autonomy and in their roles and letting them get on with it and not interfering. That can work against you when you then want to influence change and you want to influence kind of decisions because you've given it away. So I think moving forward, for the foreseeable at least, to try and protect that side of what I felt I lost, I would probably not work with a team for the foreseeable. I'm probably even going to work with people that would be contractors, freelancers. With what I'm doing at the moment, I don't intend on building a team of employees. And that's partly through a bit of protection, self-preservation, but also because I think that I lost a bit of my enjoyment when I felt like I couldn't influence change at my own company. And whatever I build next, I want to be able to always influence change, and again, not be a dictator. That's not me at all. But I won't enjoy it if I can't do something and then see the output or see the consequence or see what I'm doing to improve things.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a concrete thing, which I'm now thinking about. Okay, how do I build a company where I can grow it and scale it, but not necessarily have a team of 30, 40, 50 people working for me, but still, and I've not figured out the answer to this yet, but still give people trust and autonomy without letting go of it completely as well, if that makes sense. So I've not figured it out just yet, but they're definitely things that I'm trying to work on and think about in terms of what I want to do next. And it does tie back into the mental health side of things. Because again, I think the compounding effect of me feeling like I wasn't really enjoying my job and wasn't really having an influence on my own company did play a big part in my downfall. It's not a downfall. That's probably a bit unfair. The way it ended for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I see what you mean. And it's interesting you put it like that, actually, because do you feel then that the silver lining, to coin is it an apt phrase? I guess the kind of silver lining of what you went through is that it's enabled you to build quite a clear picture from a personal and a business perspective as to how to preserve and thrive mentally and preserve and thrive business wise, or does it all just blend into one for you?
I think it's probably more the former, where it's definitely going through all of this. It's forced me to reflect on what went well, what didn't go well. I think, again, we spoke last time about I want to write a book at some point and all of these things because
Yeah.
and I'm still thinking of stuff and coming up with things all the time. But I think when you're in the day-to-day of it and you are just running a business and getting through it and normally doing good and growing and stuff like that, you don't really ever take a step back to really think about it. And especially from a personal point of view, you don't necessarily think about the bit that you enjoy or the bit that you want to do more of, because you're just going along. It's kind of like, well, it's running itself. I'm part of it and just going to keep going. Whereas when something like what's happened to me happens, you have to think a bit harder about what went wrong, what went right. And naturally you think about, okay, what am I going to keep moving forward? What am I going to try and get rid of moving forward? So I think for me, it's definitely, there is a silver lining, as you put it, to being, I am more clearer now on what I guess I will tolerate, but it's tolerate for myself. Like, I'm the person that has enabled a lot of this stuff. It's not Aira as such or the team. It's kind of like, well, I've allowed this to happen. And there's an element where, or at the time when my therapist pulled me up on something once, which was I said I started to feel guilty working at Aira when I didn't clock on at 7:30 in the morning, or I was online after 8:00, or I took the dog on an extra walk, or I went to the gym in the morning instead of the evening. I just felt guilty about that. And she said, well, who's making you feel guilty? I was like, well, me. Like, it's me doing it myself. So I've learned now that I need to think about those things in what I want to build next. So I've learned a hell of a lot, but unfortunately for me, it's come about through a negative experience. But it's definitely a silver lining that I've now learned a bit more about how my mind works, what makes it work well, what makes it work not so well. I've had to reflect on those things, and I will definitely carry that forward with what I do next.
And do you, maybe a bit of a sticky question, but are you thankful that you went through that now?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. That's a really good question. I don't know if thankful was quite the right word, because it was a lot, and it also put my wife in particular through a lot, and my family through a lot, as well as everyone around me at the time. But there's definitely an acceptance from me now that it almost needed to happen in some ways. In that way, I don't know if I'd be where I am now, in many ways, if it hadn't have happened the way it did. I think I just muddled through and just kept going, to be honest. So I'm thankful from that perspective, in that I've been able to take a step back and been able to actually think relatively clearly about what I want to do next and what broke me, essentially. I'm thankful I've been able to reflect on it properly and do that. if I could go back and change it, I definitely wouldn't go through it again. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd definitely go back and try and obviously change how I was dealing with it sooner rather than later. So all the things I've done now as a result of therapy, talking about it and trying to reflect, I'd have tried to have done that a year ago or 18 months ago and tried to see it a bit sooner. So, yeah, I don't know if I actually answered the question, but that's a really good question.
Definitely.
I'm going to keep thinking about that because I don't know if there is an answer or not. But yeah, I think the answer is, if I had to give an answer, it's probably no. But there are some, there's definitely good parts that have come out of it, I think, thankfully.
It's nuts how much we can push ourselves as human beings and plaster over stuff until we can't. And our
Yeah.
bodies and our minds give us that jolt of, I'm not doing this anymore. And we're going to deal with it immediately. And, your line in the sand was those questions from your wife and your business partner. And it's trying, but then what's difficult is how do you prevent that if you've never got to that
Yeah,
point?
that's why I was wrestling
So
with it just
it's
then when you
tricky,
asked the
isn't it?
question. Yeah,
Yeah.
when you asked the question, I was like, well, actually, I'm glad that I've learned about this. I'm glad I've learned how my mind works, and it wouldn't have happened unless this horrible thing happened or those questions were asked to me. But I was like, yeah, but you don't really want to say you're thankful for that, right? So yeah, it's a really difficult one. But yeah,
Yeah.
you're completely right.
It's difficult, isn't it? But I guess as we head towards kind of the final few minutes, we've covered some incredible actions from the agency growth perspective, but the mindset growth perspective as well. What would you say to agency owners, founders, freelancers, anyone who works for an agency, just a dedicated employee who is scaling their career, who is in those early stages of the motivations waning, the 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 kind of feeling like it's just firefighting constantly and can't quite see those, all of those, what we can now say were critical markers for your breakdown, but you didn't realize at the time. If people are starting to see those on their own pathways, what would you say to them now to help pull back and not get to the point that you did?
I think one of the main things I'd advise people to do, and again, this is a mistake that I made, was I started optimizing for the wrong things, and it's in terms of the business. So we were given some advice, some well-intentioned advice around optimizing for profit, EBITDA, that kind of stuff, and so we set some targets around that. If I trace this all the way back, I think that led to a lot of the problems that then transpired further down the line in terms of what I wasn't enjoying about my job. So I think if I was to go back, yes, I'll take that advice on board, but I'd be also trying to optimize for, well, what do I enjoy about this job? What do I not enjoy? What do I personally want to get out of this other than financial means? What does it actually want in my job day in, day out? I'd go back and ask myself those questions. And I think for anyone listening who's in similar kind of positions like you just described, I think I just ask myself, like, what do I really want? Like, because some people, they think, most agency owners, okay, I'm going to speak very, very bluntly here or openly, most agency owners listen to this have probably considered or are considering selling their agency at some point, and they've probably had
Yeah,
conversations, that kind of
obviously.
stuff.
Yeah,
The
definitely.
monetary payoff there, I'm not going to argue with that. But optimizing for that outcome, I'd argue, is the wrong thing to do, because you could hate the journey along the way. You could do an earn out that you absolutely despise. I know many people that have. So I think I'd be really, really questioning myself on, okay, that's the outcome, fine. But what am I really optimizing for here other than the monetary outcome? Like, how do I make sure I still enjoy my job along the way? How do I make sure I still got balance in my home and personal life as well as my work life? What do I want to be able to do day in, day out that isn't about money? I would really try and optimize for those things. Whether I'm a freelancer, working in an agency, owning an agency, it's kind of bordering on corniness here a little bit, but it's about what you enjoy and how you want to live your life. And
Yeah.
I think I accidentally moved too hard towards optimizing for what I thought happiness meant, which was selling an agency for a lot of money. And actually, we can see how it's ended up, but like, it's not quite worked for me to think about it in that way. And I don't think that's everything. I'm not blaming that for everything, but I think when I started to think in that way, I forgot about the fundamentals of why I'm doing this in the first place and what I enjoy about my job. So I think I'd advise people to think about that quite hard.
Yeah, that is, I would say, probably the number one thing that people can tie their ambitions of setting up an agency to is the end of it, which is a bit when you say it that crudely, it's a bit backward, isn't it? But it's kind of true.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, and it's fine. Like nothing wrong with wanting to sell any company or an agency, but yeah, you can become a bit obsessed by it, and it can become a bit dominating in your mind, and make you forget about the other side of it as well. And if you get to that point, great, but you need to enjoy the path towards it as well, enjoy the journey. Otherwise, you've got a pretty big chunk of your life that you're probably not going to like and you want to get away from.
Yeah, it's such a valid point. It's such a valid point, because it's very easy to, and I've done it myself, and I know loads of agency owners will have done the same, to say you're out, your end goal is to sell. But there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in between. It's not like a overnight thing.
Yeah, and also even when you've sold, most people have an earn-out period of 2 to 3 years, and again, I know people that have done that and quit halfway through and left a lot of money on the table, millions in some cases, because they were just so exhausted and burnt out and drained. And it's like, is that similar to me, really? That's not really the ending that people want from selling their company. So again, that's when you optimize for the wrong things. And sometimes it's hard to control because you're selling your company, you can't control all of it. But I think it's definitely worth considering the journey towards it. And I can't remember who said this, whether it's a single person or just a bit of an ongoing thing, but you hear it said all the time that, people don't enjoy reaching the goal, they enjoy the journey to get there. And it's kind of like, you can achieve the goal, but if you hate the journey, then you're not going to get as much satisfaction from reaching that goal anyway. It is all about the journey, really, and that's our lives. That's the bit that happens day in, day out. And I forgot about it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you'd be the only one in that, for sure. And I heard a guy at I went to an event thing about scaling agencies, and his tagline was, there will be a buyer for every good business. So just don't overthink. If your business is operating pretty well, someone out there will want to buy it. So, forget about optimizing every nth degree to that along the way. And if you get to, maybe you've been doing it for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and you think, actually, a couple of years, I'm ready to go, then start the wheels in motion for flipping to optimization of profit and EBITDA and all of that kind of jazz. But to go out forensically optimizing for that and chasing that with neglecting the process and your enjoyment of the process and why you're doing it, can lead to your ultimate demise.
Yeah, it's a really fair point. And I think I'd add to that a bit by saying that, especially in the agency world, there's this obsession over growth. And I still do this where people ask me about Aira, but when I introduce Aira to someone, one of the first things I'd say is, we're 40 people, 30 people, 50 people. It's like, why does that matter? But it's the first thing we all say. Try it. Next time you speak to an agency owner, within 20 seconds, they'll have told you how big their agency is in headcount. It's because we're obsessed with the growth, and that's how we measure ourselves against other agencies, because it's one of the most visible metrics you can see. It's not about that. It's not about the growth. It's about kind of building something that actually you enjoy. If you want to build a 10-person agency and never ever sell it, that's absolutely fine if that's what you want, and that enables the lifestyle that you want. But I think a lot of us get sucked into the idea that you've got to grow it to as big as it can be, then sell it. And that's not necessarily what's going to make you happy, and especially the journey, as we just discussed. So I think it's growth for growth's sake that I think is the danger. And again, I've fallen into this trap, whereas sustainable growth, good growth is absolutely fine. But doing it just for the sake of growth, I think, can lead to a lot of problems. And for me, it definitely did.
I like that. And that in itself is an action. People can take that as a self-reflection action. To take founders and directors out there can take a step back and go, actually, what am I doing? Am I in the same mindset as Paddy was, and the optimizing for growth's sake, so we can sell, or am I optimizing for myself, and then take actions that can help with the optimization of yourself. So no, I think that's really valid and something that a load of people will be able to clock into as relatable. So on that note, thank you very much. It's been an incredible chat. I think there's loads of actionable points across loads of stuff, and really, I think what you've really helped with is humanizing agency life, humanizing founder life, and humanizing what can happen if we don't take real control over optimizing ourselves as well as our businesses.
Yeah, and hopefully it's helpful to a few people. But yeah, there's definitely humans behind any business, and I think again people can forget that. So hopefully that was helpful. If anyone resonates with any of what I've just described, particularly the mental health side, my DMs are always open on LinkedIn. So yeah, always reach out and speak up about it if I can help.
Amazing. Well, I'll put links to your profile and your latest ventures and everything in the bio. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, then fingers crossed they will. But thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing. And I'm so glad we managed to do this finally.
Cool. You're welcome. Thanks so much, Ginny.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, Paddy.
Cheers.